Welcome and thank you for joining us for the Center for Biological Diversity's webinar today. Frances Moore Lappé is an internationally renowned scholar and writer and author of Diet for a Small Planet, the revolutionary book which first drew attention to the environmental and social consequences of meat overproduction and solutions to global hunger crises in 1971. The food world is already buzzing because the 50th anniversary edition of Diet is launching September 21st. With her daughter, Anna, Frances has also co-founded the Small Planet Institute, which you can learn more about at smallplanetinstitute.org. Today, we will talk about connections between food, agriculture, and the environment, and how changes to our food system could feed the world with far less environmental impacts. We'll also dive into the myths of US meat production, the original inspiration for Diet, and why her insights are more relevant than ever as we attempt to heal the global climate. I'm Jennifer Molidor. I'm the Senior Food Campaigner for the Center for Biological Diversity, and I'm joined by my colleague Linda Rico today. And I'm delighted to talk to you all today. Welcome to Frances Moore Lappé.
Thank you.
Ask about is your inspiration. Can you tell us about the original inspiration for Diet for a Small Planet and how what you've written is even more important to understand today?
Well, it's interesting. Inspiration is a kind of misfit word because I was just horrified at first. I just had to tell the world because when I wrote that book, we were coming out of the 60s, a time of a lot of hope in terms of the war on poverty that I was part of. And I got to Berkeley and suddenly the world shifted into a fear mode because Paul Ehrlich's book, The Population Bomb, had exploded. And I remember this cartoon about his book with people kind of falling off the edges of the earth because there were just too many of us. And I knew people who were not having children because we couldn't do this. It wasn't ethical. And there was the fear was rampant. And I thought, oh, okay, I've got to find a path in my life. And what if I start with food? Everybody needs to eat. And if I just could understand this question, are we really at the Earth's limits? Is this really the cause of hunger? That would open the knowledge pathways for me to find my own life direction. I had no idea what would become of that. But I started putting two and two together literally with my dad's slide rule. I'm sure nobody in the audience is under my age know what slide rule is. And then I was just horrified to see that, wait a minute, there was no scarcity, that human beings were actively creating the suffering, the experience of scarcity when there were plenty of resources. And the most shocking thing was that we were feeding this vast quantity to livestock that only brought back to us a tiny fraction of what we fed to them. And yet we were saying scarcity, scarcity. So it was really like shock. And I wrote a one-page handout that I delivered to my friends and said, you know, this is really good news because if human beings are creating hunger, then we can end it. It's not hopeless. I guess that part was inspiring, that we human beings are doing it, and so therefore we can stop doing it, whereas if we really were reaching Earth's limits, then it would be terrible. And so that was the beginning, and I just started taking notes, and then it kept getting bigger and bigger, and then it got into the hands of one of the key founders of paperback publishing in America by happenstance. So that was the beginning.
And you write a lot about various food topics, but in terms of this myth you're saying of scarcity, that we actually produce enough food or that we can produce enough food to feed the world, what does a diet for a small planet look like?
What
does a diet for a small planet, what does that look like?
What does it look like? Well, it's come in my life. I've shifted a bit from describing it as a plant-centered diet to describing it as a planet-centered diet. That I've learned so much more about the entire planetary implications And so I begin the new chapter in the 50th anniversary edition. I include what I got this term from Jane Goodall, the tapestry of life. And so I described 10 tears in the tapestry of life that are related to food. And so it's really so much deeper and broader now that I understand that it's not just incredibly wasteful and therefore unethical to waste precious food by this very inefficient production system of grain-fed meats in your diet, but it also is destructive of the entire web of life in terms of the eradication of species, that, you know, we've gotten rid of something like 80% of all mammals that, I mean, human beings have, by our livestock, we've kind of pushed all these other mammals out of the way. And and of course, you know, with our pesticides that they have become so much more toxic. I think I read the statistic that US agriculture is now 48 times more toxic than it was when just a few decades ago. And so, you know, we've come so much further in terms of actually destroying the web of life in ways that are connected with food. And so I call it now the planet-centered diet.
And as I mentioned, the 50th anniversary launch is September 21st, and you and I were just talking about that because that just happens to be my birthday, which is a good moment. But we were also reflecting on just the incredible amount of work that you've done and the last 50 years. So I want to ask you about changes in terms of, and you just mentioned one with agriculture becoming even more toxic, the changes that you've seen in the past 50 years and where you hope will go in the next 50 years.
Well, it is kind of the good news, bad news, because I do feel that, you know, I started saying very early on, the book came out when I was 27. And I started saying very early that hunger is not caused by scarcity of food, it's caused by scarcity of democracy. People don't have power to access what we are producing. And in some ways, I do feel, even though our democracy has become more corrupted by money, more corrupted by corporate power influencing everything from, you know, I was just learning yesterday more about how the sugar industry did what the tobacco industry did and really worked hard to divert people's attention from the dangers of sugar in our diets. And so in one way, yes, there's more corporate concentration infiltrating our food system, and there's consolidation of control over our agricultural system, and farmers are getting something like only 8 cents per consumer dollar. So there's a lot greater inequality in one sense, in a very deep way. And at the same time, I feel like more people are getting it, that we have to address the roots. We have to address the roots in monopoly, corporate power, that then warps our political democracy and warps it away from what I call living democracy, where we each really have a voice to protect ourselves and all we love. So there is a democracy movement. We're co-sponsors of a democracy movement website, democracymovement.us, and really highlighting the degree to which people are getting it, no matter what issue is your entry point, that we can't address any of them without democracy answering to our interests, not to corporate interests. So it's the both and on the inequality side, I'm sure you all are aware, that we now have 3 billionaires who control as much wealth as control as much income as half the US population. And it's almost beyond belief, the level of inequality. So we're living in this time where in two directions at once, but it makes it easy to see which we want to get behind, certainly. And so I feel like food is a more useful entry point than ever, because it embodies all of those contradictions, and it takes us right back to whether or not we as a living, how life on Earth itself can continue. Because I'm sure you're aware of David Attenborough and other people who are calling this the sixth great extinction. And so I don't think most people are aware of that. And that's why I'm so happy about the kind of thing you're doing, because I don't think people get it, how much our grain-fed, meat-centered diet simplifies and eradicates the great diversity, which is our own. If we just think of our species, it's our own security system. It's the tapestry of life that we need to thrive in the future. So I guess those are some of the first thoughts that come to mind in terms of how we are so far beyond just the problems with the meat-centered diet, but the overall agricultural system, how it's increased toxicity, certainly with GMOs that are tied to glyphosate, which is a known carcinogen, that, I don't think anybody in 1970s could imagine the whole GMO locking the country into a particular pesticide, which is now banned or heavily restricted in a lot of countries. So there's so much that we couldn't have known that I'm just beginning, to think about how to talk about it at the 50th anniversary.
Thank you. And one of the sectors you mentioned that are really highly consolidated and having this outsized impact on the environment, of course, is the meat sector. Highly consolidated, and these huge burn meat-centric diets in the US are creating all of this harm from biodiversity and species extinction, as you mentioned, climate crisis. Can you talk about this section in your book where you explain meat mystique and what you mean by that?
Well, I grew up in Texas, so I know the meat mystique because the stockyards were not far from our house. And so the idea of a meal without meat was just not really conceivable. What's for dinner was, it's either pork chops or hamburgers or So the meat mystique was simply that we could not get enough protein and good protein without eating meat. And that was just it wasn't even discussed because it wasn't even a question, that was just a given. And so actually when I wrote the book and said that, wait, we're eating more protein than we can even use, and that's even more true today. We eat, on average, Americans eat twice the protein that their bodies need. And just by the way, folks, we don't store protein as protein. If we eat more than we need, it's just used like any other carb, just used for energy. So it's this fixation. And, when the book first came out, some friend said, Frankie, you really put my house at peace because my parents thought I would die. Maybe that was a bit of an exaggeration, but my parents thought I couldn't survive well. I couldn't be healthy without eating meat. And so I gave them your book, and we had a little less tension in the house. So, the mystique, I think, is melting a bit as people come to appreciate more the health evidence that plant-centered eating is overall associated with lower mortality across the board, and that some things like diabetes that has increased fourfold in the last 25 years, I think it is. And just can I tell you a story about that? Because the then borough president, I guess he's still the borough president, in Eric Adams in New York and Brooklyn, he contacted me when I was working on the book, and he said that because of diet for a small planet, he had shifted to plant-centered eating, and his diabetes cured itself. He healed from diabetes. And so it was just, and then I had to okay, this sounds a little too good to be true. I put in some references to validate this one testimonial, but that such a plague of harm that diabetes brings to our country, and that is directly related to this. So that news is out. The mystique is really melting, because I think there are now these associations, and particularly, I'm sure you're aware that processed meat and red meat, but particularly processed, is the most damaging and associated with cancer. It's considered a carcinogen of a first order. So I think the words are getting out there, and certainly it's true that when I wrote Diet for a Small Planet, you couldn't go out to eat and ask for a plant main dish. It just didn't exist. And now in most places across the country, in most cities at least, you can always get something yummy that's plant-based.
And you mentioned sugar and you mentioned meat and kind of how they're normalized and what we take for granted should be on our plate. What are some other things that we take for granted or some other narratives about food and agriculture that you'd like to see us challenge or change?
Well, I would like, it's an interesting question. I would certainly love it if people could see farming, agriculture more generally, all that we are doing to grow food for ourselves, to nourish us, if we could see it also as this great gift for fighting climate change, great gift for increasing biodiversity, generally speaking, to make us less vulnerable as climate changes make it harder to grow food. We need more biodiversity to draw seeds from that are more drought tolerant, for example. We need to experiment with crops that use less water. And certainly, I was just reading as I prepped for this interview, reminding myself of like some beef takes something, I've already forgotten the multiple, but some huge greater amount of water to produce a pound of beef than to produce a pound of plant food. So that's all going to become more important in the future. So I think that this is one of the most rewarding things in writing the 50th anniversary edition of the book, is that I just got so excited about sharing stories, say, of agroforestry, which most people haven't heard that word yet. But I think that it's going to spread as a common thing. And it's so exciting that you see it's got a long history, particularly in Southeast Asia and South Asia, but in many places where we didn't have this idea that crops grow here and then you leave some trees over here. No. That trees and crops actually don't compete, they complement, they're partners. And so in the book, I love to tell the story of one of the poorest countries in the world, where they went through great famine, which I associated, this is Niger, in part of the Sahel region of Africa. It's very dry. And I'd always associated it just with famine. And then I got in touch with people who were there on the ground who, after the 1990s, they started being able to grow, or in the 90s, they would grow again. But instead of planting trees, they allowed the roots and the cut trunks of trees to regrow. And so it was called farmer managed natural regeneration. And the farmers came back to their traditional understanding that if you, in that part of the world, especially, I would imagine, especially, that if you have some tree cover, it keeps the soil from drying out so much. And, it really helps in a area with not so much rainfall. And you get the leaves that can be used as fertilizer, just falling onto the earth. And so you get higher yields. And so this movement for agroforestry ended up protecting and growing something like 200 million trees. And at the time, it would be feeding about 17% of the population from that effort, from shifting from the, cutting the trees to make room for plants to going back to traditional knowledge of the integration of the two. And so I think there's a group, there are several prominent groups here, probably many more than I know about, but Soulflower Farm, do you know that organization? Soulflower Farm in North New York, and they teach indigenous approaches to agroforestry. And then there's the Savannah Institute in the Midwest, and they're doing a similar sort of thing. So that's one shift of really thinking of agriculture not as just where we grow food in this big monocultures, but really this rich terrain in which can help us prevent soil loss, can help prevent dry, can help protect water, and can that the trees and crops can grow together to help prevent help to address climate change by being able to absorb carbon. And so all of that is what I think is the rethinking of agriculture in a way that's just so comforting, I think, because it really helps you see that nature is really working with us if we just pay attention and don't just put our simple mind on it and create these straight rows of monoculture. That I like this, just a shift of frame where we feel like we can really count on nature to work with us.
So these concepts of drawing on indigenous knowledge and agroecology, agroforestry, regenerative agriculture, these concepts of how we grow food and how we eat food are kind of highlighting the issue I want to ask you about next, which is the relationship between individual actions and individual changes and systems change. And some people say, we need systems change, but that doesn't mean that individual choices don't matter. We need individual choices. That doesn't mean that we don't need systems change. So, I want to ask you about why is it important, first of all, as an individual, to align yourself through your diet with the world that you want to see?
Well, it's been a premise of my life because it's been true for me psychologically, that I feel the more that my daily choices, and what is more daily than eating, we have to, in terms of relating to each other and the earth and our bodies, eating multiple times a day. I'm a kind of grazer, and that's really personal and daily. We have to think about what is that act? And so I think it's such an opportunity. I think of it, I've got to come up with a better metaphor, but it's like a little string around my finger, just constantly reminding me of those connections. And I feel that if we don't act in a way ourselves that is aligned with the world we want, then it's very hard to feel credible to ourselves. And if we don't feel credible to ourselves, I think it's hard for us to feel credible to other people. So it's also, it's empowerment to feel more powerful myself and to feel more credible myself, that I have something to, stand on, that I'm not just whistling Dixie, as we used to say in the South. I'm not just, that it's me. I'm not just making up a story. So it's all of that. And I think then, of course, it's not an either or, because then the more we align, then the more we feel like, okay, what's the next step? And in my life, I've been saying that the root cause is a failure of democracy, the corruption of our democracy. So what am I doing about that? And so I've tried to learn, to walk on 2 feet at once, and not always with same weight on each, because I've been going back and forth throughout my life in terms of my writing and speaking. But it's so connected for me. And so in 2016 and beyond, especially after the election of Donald Trump, I really did a deep dive into how do I make a difference for democracy. And I ended up marching from Philadelphia to Washington as part of Democracy Spring. And that, I'm kind of going off your question, but maybe it's not. But, I always say that the way to find our inner courage is to do just, no matter how much our hearts pound, to do what we thought we could not do. And honestly, I didn't know if I could walk 10 miles. I didn't want to be the little old lady they towed off, oh, sorry, but she couldn't make it. No, I didn't want to be that lady. So, but I signed up, and it was life-changing, because when you come together, and I'm sure you've had that experience, come together with strangers for a common purpose, what you believe in. And then I get chills saying this, I met a teenager from California, a professor from MIT, a former banker from Wall Street, and you meet people you wouldn't meet. And then you realize, wait, we all share this value. In that case, it was getting our democracy to represent us. And so you don't feel so alone, because sometimes it can feel like, oh, I'm just in my little bubble, that other people don't share that concern, about biodiversity. So I think that that theme of that I can do both. I can be true to my living democracy commitment that underscore diversity, if we're going to save life on Earth, it's who makes the decisions. I've got to get into the democracy piece. And at the same time, I can still come to my first love, which was using, I'll say using, if that's okay, because it really was, a way to open people up to what was wrong and to give people a very personal pathway to feel connected to solutions. So I guess that's the dance, or it's the walk I'm trying to continue, and always to not feel conflicted or not feel torn, but feel grateful that I can weave these together.
Thank you so much. And what kinds of policies or solutions would you like to see on a larger scale?
Well, the first would, the core democracy reforms that you would read about at our website, democracymovement.us, are the reforms now being put forth in Congress. Basically, there are three categories. They're very straightforward. End of voter suppression, make voting easier for people, get rid of gerrymandering altogether, and get money out of its central role in politics. And I just want to underscore for Americans, because we think we're one of the greatest democracies or the greatest. I did a poll that said that most of us think we're in one of those categories. But actually, depending on what very highly esteemed rankings tell us, that we either rank behind 50 or almost 60 countries in the world in terms of the quality, the integrity of our democracy. So we've got a long road to go there. And I think that really those sets of reforms are that you don't have to desert your particular issue passion in order to just be awake and to join on, and if possible, even come out of your sequester and show up as a live human being for these causes. And so I do think there's more and more understanding that those are foundational. What we need to know is how poorly we rank now, and we need to, I don't like to talk about it, but we need to be a little bit ashamed. We need to be somewhat embarrassed that we are so out of sync. Our consciousness about our democracy is so out of sync with our true international standing.
And you've mentioned democracy and given the website, and feel free to give it again for anybody who missed it. But I wanted to ask you how that might connect with the policies that you mentioned and the concept of food justice. What does food justice mean to you, or agricultural justice? You've done incredible work for hunger and poverty, and just want to give you another opportunity to explain to those who are not familiar.
Well, I think that food justice is economic justice fundamentally. It's about people being able to access and to have in their communities available to them opportunities to purchase affordable, healthy food. And that requires really addressing the extreme inequality I was referring to before. And just on that score, for all you younger listeners, I just want to point out, because I think it's so important, that it always wasn't this way. We weren't always toward all the money rushing to the top. I think about my children's generation versus my generation. I was born in the 40s. And so from the 40s to my children were born in the 70s. In that period, every income rank, every income group gained a doubling of real family income. Real family income doubled. And the poorest 20% gained the most. Not a whole lot more, but a little bit more than the most. But the point is, we all gained across the board. Then my children's generation, those born in the 70s, the opposite. You can see the chart, and all the money is rushing to not all of it, but the vast majority is rushing to the top 20%. And so I just want to underscore for all the listeners and viewers that this we achieved this prior period through the organizing going on in the 60s. We achieved this much greater equity. And then what happened, the mindset was shifted very deliberately by the business class that set out to tell us that, oh, government was the enemy and that we had to end standards, we had to let just the market, big monopolies do their thing, basically. And that was in the 1980s, and then everything began to shift. So it can either be, I can see how that story could be discouraging, but for me, it's empowering because it hasn't always been this way. And we know then the kinds, what was different in that period? Well, the tax system was different. Corporations paid a much greater share of the overall taxes than they do today. And there were just many more programs that enabled people to advance. And I took part in one during the 60s. It was an effort to help people who were renters get out from under slum landlords and to actually be able to buy their homes. And that was the city of Philadelphia. They were putting money into that. And I was hired to help. So it's not rocket science. Other countries are doing it. We really have so much to learn from others in terms of, basic things like childcare, early childhood, care for your children, not being affordable for everyone, right? And college education being affordable for virtually everyone. I mean, that is true in several European countries. So it's not mysterious how we can begin to create economic justice, and therefore our communities begin to change, and we can set new rules in which, my daughter, bless her heart, I so admire her work. And at her Good Food Purchasing, for example, they have a program with schools. Here's public schools, a great place to give kids of every income group a chance to eat healthy food. And now I believe that in 14 cities, the school procurement for the school lunches is from local farms, and there's much more. They're reinstating kitchens so they can have fresher food. That's, again, doesn't take a PhD in economics, folks. There are so many ways we could make healthy food available for every income group, but we've also got to get rid of poverty in America, in this incredibly rich country. And so, everything from simple things like Joe Biden just increased what is purchased with food stamps, for example. That's a start, but that's a bare start. I just want to underscore again that we have a lot to learn from other countries that are doing much better than we are, and in those things like providing childcare for everyone. And so people don't have to stay home and can therefore support their families. And that is a good advance toward ending food injustice.
I'm glad you mentioned schools. I wanted to ask you about that as well. We're big fans of your daughter, Anna, and we're also big fans of the Good Food Purchasing program. School food is one area where playgrounds can be leveled with equal access to healthy, sustainable foods, as you mentioned. 30 million school meals are served daily, and it would be more if we served it to every child, but many of the children who are receiving the meals are food insecure, and that might be the only meal that they get every day. And the quality of the school food is a real problem. It's both for sustainability and for health and nutrition. And you write a lot about hunger and food insecurity, and you mentioned some of the policies you like to see. And I wonder if you could just talk about your thoughts about why do we have this food insecurity problem? I've worked with schools where they don't have dishwashers. Many don't have staff, they don't have training, they don't have access to food. We are this incredibly wealthy nation that provides more than enough food for every citizen, every child. And so why are we lacking access to healthy food? It's not simply a matter of saying you should eat a better, healthier diet. Some people lack access to food, and some people lack access to healthy, sustainable food. Why?
Well, aside from the structure, underneath the structure I was describing about money and politics and that corrupts our system and the reforms that we can undertake, but beneath that corruption is a culture, and it is a culture of blame and shame. And that's what we really need to be aware of, that I think a lot of people who are low income and are white feel a lot of shame they feel even subconsciously that somehow if they are not making it, that they're to blame, instead of this incredibly unequal society that's so oppressive and so unfair, and the rigged rules that concentrate such power at the top. And so then if we feel shame, unfortunately, human beings are vulnerable to blaming. If we feel shame, we want to point somebody else that's really. So I think that divides us. It divides us across cultures within this broader culture. And that's what I think we really need to be aware of, is how do we talk to all people to help them understand, who are low income, help understand that this is not their fault, and it's not the fault of some other group, poor people. It is about a system that is structured. The rules are set to concentrate wealth and power at the top, and that's what we've got to address together. So I think just being sensitive to that, because it's very easy to blame. I think certain groups of white working class people who are known to, be more blaming, and it's very hard to blame them, right? And it makes me very angry to hear some of their blaming. But somehow, I think this is what I'm struggling with very personally, because in my family, I have to deal with this. Just how to talk about what are the underlying fairness questions that together we can address, like those three I was mentioning. I think that if we can stick to the, really focus on the unfairness in our system that is causing low people to struggle so hard, including, I want to give a shout out for the labor movement, including the way that recent Supreme Court decision, others have made it even harder for labor organizers. So we've got to always embrace the importance of supporting a strong labor movement. One of the things that characterizes I think of my generation, that we grew up, that something like a third of all private sector workers were members of unions, and they were able to negotiate fair return on their labor. And now, it's like 6% or something like that of the private employment. So that's another piece of unfairness that we just don't talk a lot about the labor movement these days as part of food justice and other things. And I just realized that that's a real failing. And I think when I talk about living democracy, that for me, trade unions are really part of that, where people get a voice right in the workplace, not just in the ballot box. But economic democracy starts with a voice in the workplace.
Thank you. I think those social divisions, the society divisions, and also showing up in many of our homes and our own families, and it's hard to talk about. And so I'm wondering if, given the political climate right now, if you have any suggestions for how we overcome these divisions. I know you said to focus on the inequity, but how can we focus on moving towards kind of like the common good in terms of a healthy, just, and sustainable food system?
Well, I think, again, to focus on just one of my favorite quotes, the now departed Paul Wellstone. Does that name mean anything to you? He was a beloved legislator from the Midwest and from Minnesota, right? Yeah, I think so. Anyway, Paul Wellstone, he once said, and I have the bumper sticker actually, "We all do better when we all do better." Isn't that great? And then from my friend Hans-Peter Durer in Germany, physicist, he's no longer with us either, but he said, "Frankie, in biological systems, there are no parts, only participants." And that idea that we all do better when we all do better is part of what Hans-Peter is getting at, that we are all connected. And the more that we can talk to everyone about, whether it's our family members who are very much thinking, "Oh, you're some wild lefty and I can't deal with that," but talk about the ways that we all do better when workers have a voice, you know, that we all do better when we don't have monopoly power in a food system that doesn't give us real choice and gives us products that are killing us. You know, 60% of the calories now that US we eat here are nutritionally lacking. They're just empty calories of highly processed foods. And so I think that just that theme of these two, my two favorite quotations on it, this theme of our interconnectedness, and not that you're a bad person and you're making these other people suffer because you're doing better. That doesn't work, right? But that that our faith, we all will do better as we all gain. And you know, you think about whatever person that you come across, you know, in your daily life, you know that interaction is going to be much more satisfying if that person feels that they are themselves justly treated. And so we all have a voice of, we have both our personal needs and our empathetic needs to be met by justice. And I also want to just add here on this that, you know, part of what happened during the 80s and the shift to government is the enemy and the market is our friend was based in this notion that all we can really count on for our flawed species is self-interest. It was very much this idea, this distortion of Adam Smith. I understand that they even wore Adam Smith neckties in the White House during the Reagan years. But Adam Smith was a very sophisticated philosopher. And he once said, evidently he said, however selfish some man may be supposed to be, there are evidently some principles in his nature which interest him in the well-being of others, though he gain nothing from it except the pleasure of seeing it. He also said, we love our neighbors only as we are able to love ourselves. This was Adam Smith. So we have to believe that we evolved in these tightly knit tribes. And it was our social intelligence that allowed us, meaning our capacity to cooperate and to compromise with each other, that allowed us to emerge as this dominant species. Now we've got to say, okay, we got to get trusting that again and calling on it again now as life is threatened by the decimation of biodiversity and through our actions and through definitely greenhouse gas emissions and all of that. So I think we need to challenge in every way we can the premise that human beings are just incapable of true cooperation for the greater good. And in fact, remember also, as I said, greater good there, that in our preamble to our own Constitution is that our whole, the whole founding of our nation, part of it, it talked about promoting the general welfare as a goal. And so it's not just, oh, we've got to do all this so that we can each, battle each other for our selfish little selves. No, it was for the general welfare. So I think all of that helps me stay sane anyway, that to remind myself that we are fundamentally creatures who enjoy cooperation, that we're wired for empathy. And I can tell you stories about that. Well, let me just tell you one, is that okay? But they did experiments they meaning some scientists looked at our brains while we were cooperating and then while we were competing, and they found that the same pleasure centers light up when we're cooperating that light up when we're eating chocolate. So cooperating is as pleasant, is as satisfying to us as eating chocolate. And personally, I love chocolate, so I love this story. So, so it takes a lot to kind of knock that out of people, right? It's work to convince people that they have to just look out for themselves. And I think we really can trust that if we just share more in a way that shows people all the win-win-wins by incorporating the larger network of humanity in our own decisions, including getting our democracy to work for the citizens instead of corporations, we don't have to say, oh, you've got to overcome your selfishness. No, we can say, oh, you know, that we can, I don't mean say literally necessary, but we can assume that of course they want a place where that they feel that they can cooperate with others toward a common goal.
Thank you so much for sharing that and for reminding me of Adam Smith, who I haven't studied for many years. I want to just look at a few of the questions that our audience have raised. Let's see here. Brenda asks, what role do you see local farmers markets playing a part of? You mentioned the importance of local agriculture and regional hubs. What role do you see farmers markets playing?
Well, I highlight them in one piece of my opening chapter because I have a little section about what are the positive steps that are happening in the expansion of farmers markets, and I certainly think that I just couldn't rave more. I have one except for COVID, we have one right outside of our office every week. One comes there and we get to go over and get stuff, and it's just, I don't know, it's practically helpful, of course, to keep farmers alive in the area and diversified production for diversified taste. But it's also that just a reminder, a body reminder, right? A consciousness reminder that we're connected. Oh, these people actually grew this food. It doesn't just come down from the back of the supermarket boxes. It's from farmers. And so I think at a deeper level, that even we might not be conscious of, that it reminds us of the value of these human beings who are devoting their lives to bringing us health. And so I couldn't say more for that. And that's, not in your perspective, but in my longer one, that's a pretty new thing, because when I was growing up, we didn't have farmers markets at all. So I just love it that it's continuing to build, and also community supported agriculture. I just love that. And we are able to enjoy that here in the Boston area. So again, I think that started in Massachusetts, I'm proud to say. So community or supported agriculture, where basically, if you don't know, it's just where families sign up and pay in the beginning of the season, where then they can get this great produce throughout the summer. So that's also really wonderful.
And local farmers markets, community supported agriculture, regional food hubs, urban gardens, anything that's increasing the access to healthy, sustainable food is good. And I think one of our other questions from Swellen is, do you promote organic foods or non-GMO foods? Is that important to you?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely important. Organic, when we look at what 48 times more toxic American agriculture is than it was a few decades ago. I mean, the level of assault from chemicals, and we know that soy and corn are tied to the glyphosate pesticide, and we know that it is a carcinogen, as I think I said earlier, that has been banned in a number of countries. And we use, compared to the rest of the world, way more than our proportion of population of it's keeping that alive, so that I just, any way that I can support organic. And of course, some people can't afford it, so that makes it even more important for people who have any kind of margin to choose organic, and to talk about why they're choosing organic, for the health of farm workers as well as themselves, and for the health of the soil, and on and on. So I just couldn't feel more strongly about that. And what was the other, organic, and what was the other question?
Non-GMO.
Yeah, well, again, GMO, I just think of it as, it just reeks of concentration of power. It's saying that there is one formula that there's one kind of seed that requires this kind of insecticide for you to use it. There is one maker of it, Bayer Monsanto now, and it denies choice, and it creates this monopoly power that is responsible for so much of the devastation of diversity. And they're just not, I mean, when you get that kind of concentrated power, I'll tell you a story from our family, because my first husband, Moore Lappé, wrote the first, this was in 98, really early on, he wrote a book called Against the Grain, where he exposed the dangers of, he began to say, wait a minute, you know, let's question this technology and the danger of glyphosate. And guess what? When he tried to get it published, Monsanto threatened the publisher, threatened with the lawsuit if they published it. And so they rejected the book, and then he had to find another publisher. And guess what the name of that publisher is? Common Courage Press. But it just shows you the kind of hubris and big bully power of monopoly. And they succeeded. They got the major publisher in New York to fold. I mean, to you know, say no, we won't publish this book. So that's the kind of power. I tell that story because Mark is such a hero to me, but also to just alert us, what does monopoly power do? It's not just in the field, right? But it's in the marketplace more broadly too. Marketplace of ideas, right? They were blocking information.
Yeah, and that same audience member has another question, and I'm not sure we can answer it, but she works with a nonprofit that promotes sustainable regenerative agriculture, but they accept help from large agricultural corporations. So how does the nonprofit maintain the mission? She uses this phrase the second time I've only heard it today, mission creep, you know, extending past your mission. How does the nonprofit maintain their mission, help farmers, but not get sucked into the corporate area that you're warning everyone about? That's a
wow. That is a huge ethical question. Before I answer that, I want to go back to the question about GMOs, because there is now a lot of talk about this expose of the Monsanto papers, that this secret documents that I really highly recommend that people look for that, because that shows just what power, how concentrated power corrupts people. So I guess it does sort of tie into your question, will you be corrupted in your vision? And that's what you're struggling with. And I guess I can't answer that for you. I can't say no, never, never. I know when I was fundraising for the social benefit organizations that I co-founded, that was always a big question. And fortunately then, and I hope you too, can find foundations and major donors who really believe in your mission and aren't invested in something that is alien from your mission. I can't answer it. It's such a deep ethical question, and I'm sure you're doing good work. But also, just aside from your own fear maybe of mission creep or something, just how the world then perceives you differently depending on where your money is coming from is a huge question. So I can't answer, but I do know that it's a really difficult ethical question, because then that organization that you don't necessarily align with, that makes them look better too, because they're supporting you. Big question. So good luck with it. Sorry, I can't be better.
And one of our audience members wants you to know that her husband gave her your book in 1972, and it's affected her life forever and taught her to cook, and she's celebrating it today. So thank you. And
oh, you made me cry. Yeah, since 1972, you were an early adopter, right? So that is so exciting. And yeah, I hope you, I just want to give a shout out to my daughter, Anna Lappé, who really took on the sort of, the vision of the new book is all the new material for me. It's just a new opening chapter that it talks about some of the things we've been talking about. But Anna took on the bringing the recipe section into the 21st century. And she said, "Mom, do you realize you have 70 references to margarine in your book?" And that was when I know now it was the sugar industry that was telling us that had the secret plot to get us diverted onto how bad fat was. And I fell for it. And so, we had to get away from animal fat and onto margarine. But anyway, forgive me for that. And they're all out now because my daughter took on bringing all the recipes in the 21st century. Wonderful recipe consultant, Wendy Lopez, they're just spruced up, is the way I think of it. And then we have about a dozen key chefs, really breakthrough plant-centered chefs who are sharing a recipe with us. So it's that's the new book, and I just hope that you enjoy it. And I'm just so happy I made it to the 50th anniversary.
Congratulations on that. And the chefs are wonderful. The recipes are incredible. We have Alicia Kennedy and Brian Terry. I mean, they're just really delicious, unique individual meals, and I've just been very impressed. You can find Diet for a Small Planet at independent booksellers and online. You can learn more about Frances at smallplanetinstitute.org. Thank you so much, Frances Moore Lappé, for joining us. Congratulations on the 50th anniversary of your book. And please, everyone, go out and pick up a coffee and share towards our communal good for the Diet for a Small Planet. Thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you so much, Jennifer and Linda. So sweet of you to have me on this very special time, and happy birthday too. So it was a total delight. Your questions really touched me. Thank you.
Thank you.